He was just a poor boy from Buffalo, the son of immigrants and a school dropout by age 12. No fortune, no formal education, just the back-breaking grind of factory floors and meatpacking plants. Yet behind the noise of cleavers and steam was a mind quietly observing, watching what others threw away and questioning what others ignored. Years later, from the most unwanted parts of pork, George Hormel would help spark a food revolution. This is not a story of instant success or genius-born wealth. It's about how one boy turned rejection into invention and turned scraps into Spam, one of the world's most iconic foods. A butcher's son with big hunger. George Hormel was born in 1860 in Buffalo, New York, to German immigrants who believed in survival through labor, not comfort. His father worked as a tanner and butcher, and from early on, George was expected to contribute. By age 12, he had dropped out of school and began a string of physically demanding jobs. He hauled timber, labored on farms, and eventually found work as an assistant to a traveling meat packer. These roles weren't glamorous, but they taught him the fundamentals of industrial work, especially meat handling, animal breakdown, preservation techniques, and supply routes in an America still relying on rail and horse-drawn transport. At one point, George was dismissed from a job at a meatpacking plant for raising concerns about cleanliness. While most accepted unsanitary conditions as standard, George's discomfort with rotting scraps and sloppy operations marked a clear divide between him and his peers. That firing wasn't just a setback, it was a turning point. It sharpened his understanding that the meat industry needed not just muscle, but order and integrity. It also revealed how easily unsafe practices could harm customers and businesses alike. He often went without food himself, sometimes living on stale bread or relying on local charity kitchens. Those periods of hunger carved something into him that would never leave, an obsession with food security and affordability. He observed how much usable meat was discarded, shoulder cuts, fatty trimmings, bones with flavor still inside, and began to wonder why those byproducts weren't being turned into something useful. George wasn't yet an inventor, but he had experience and a growing belief that overlooked ingredients held untapped potential. Each low-paying job gave him one more puzzle piece in understanding the meat trade, not as it was, but as it could be. That hard-earned knowledge would eventually push him west, where he'd try and fail to start a business of his own. One butcher shop and a dream. In 1887, George Hormel, now in his late 20s, borrowed $500. He used the funds to open a modest butcher shop in Austin, Minnesota, a small town on the edge of agricultural development. The odds were against him. Larger meat companies dominated urban centers, and rural consumers often slaughtered animals themselves. Still, George believed his first-hand experience and relentless work ethic could give him an edge. From the start, the business was a struggle. A breakdown in refrigeration equipment during his first summer led to hundreds of pounds of spoiled meat, a loss he couldn't afford. Not long after, a sanitation scare forced him to destroy several products, prompting local suspicion and a temporary dip in customer traffic. George responded by making cleanliness a public priority. He also encountered challenges with labor. During harvest season, local workers prioritized farm jobs, and George found himself short-handed, working long hours alone. To keep the business afloat, he diversified. He experimented with product labeling, testing different fonts and packaging colors. One of his early ideas, selling smoked goose, failed entirely, drawing few buyers and wasting resources, but he learned from it. In 1892, as the business was slowly gaining ground, George married Lillian Gleason, a schoolteacher from Austin. Their marriage brought new stability to his personal life, just as his professional world was entering a fragile stage of growth. 1 year later, in 1893, their son, J. Catherwood Hormel, was born, a child who would one day take the company his father founded and turn it into a global brand. With a growing family depending on him, George had even more reason to keep pushing forward, despite the setbacks. His breakthrough came not from innovation, but from persistence. He started selling smoked sausage at county fairs and farmers markets, where the public could taste the quality directly. Slowly, his reputation grew. He earned trust through consistency and fair dealings with local farmers. As profits crept upward, George began to invest in equipment upgrades and a small team of employees. The butcher shop evolved into a small processing facility, capable of handling volume and maintaining standards. He didn't just sell meat, he began shaping how meat was packaged, sold, and perceived. It was the quiet beginning of something much larger, but prosperity wouldn't last long. The meat industry was entering its most volatile period, and George was about to face betrayal from within. Sabotage and the Hormel strike. By the early 1900s, George Hormel had transformed his modest butcher shop into a growing regional enterprise. His operations expanded beyond Austin, and his products, particularly cured ham and sausage, were beginning to gain regional traction. But success brought not only attention, it also attracted opportunists. In 1903, Hormel's trust in a circle of longtime managers would nearly destroy everything he had built. A quiet conspiracy unraveled behind the scenes. Senior staff, entrusted with company finances, were secretly embezzling funds, falsifying financial statements, and redirecting resources for personal gain. The damage was severe. Over $20,000, a sum equivalent to more than $500,000 today, was lost. As money disappeared, payroll fell behind, orders were delayed, and factory morale crumbled. Suppliers grew restless and rumors began circulating about the company's future. When George uncovered the fraud, it was nearly too late. Production had slowed to a crawl. The local press picked up the story, and George was forced to face public scrutiny head-on. He issued statements, spoke with newspapers, and personally assured farmers and retailers that the company would honor its obligations. But internally, the blow was devastating. George immediately fired the implicated managers and brought in outside auditors to comb through every financial record. He overhauled the company's leadership, placing key roles under the supervision of family members or newly vetted professionals. He installed a system of checks and balances, including daily reconciliations and scheduled internal reviews that would become industry best practices. Still, the scandal left scars. Some workers never returned. A handful of partners withdrew support. George became more guarded, less trusting, and far more involved in every corner of his business. The betrayal reinforced his belief that resilience had to be built into every layer of the company, from hiring and training to finances to management culture. With the crisis behind him, George turned his focus to the future and began investing in the next generation of leadership. J. Hormel and the next chapter. After stabilizing the company from internal betrayal, George Hormel shifted his focus towards securing the future. His son, J. Catherwood Hormel, returned from service in World War I with a different outlook. While George had built the company through caution and discipline, Jay brought a daring energy rooted in modern ideas, public relations, and innovation. Jay joined the company officially in the early 1920s. From the start, he pushed for changes that raised eyebrows within Hormel's traditional ranks. He proposed mechanizing sections of the factory floor, creating centralized production schedules, and adopting more aggressive branding. George hesitated, but Jay pressed on and eventually earned enough room to test his theories. His first major project, a canned chicken and rice product, failed miserably. The texture turned mushy during canning, and the taste didn't hold up in storage. Retailers rejected it, but instead of retreating, Jay treated the failure as feedback. He revamped the company's small research team, creating what would later become a full-fledged product development division. Jay also understood the changing media landscape. He organized factory tours for journalists to showcase Hormel's cleanliness standards. He commissioned radio advertisements with catchy slogans and even encouraged recipe contests where homemakers submitted ways to cook Hormel products. These outreach efforts helped reshape the company's public image, from a local meat packer to a household name with a personality. Yet one of Jay's boldest ideas wasn't marketing, but efficiency. He became fixated on pork shoulder, a tough, undervalued cut of meat often discarded or sold at a loss. Jay believed that if Hormel could find a way to preserve, process, and sell it creatively, the company could turn waste into wealth. Senior board members pushed back, concerned it would tarnish the premium image George had fought to protect. But Jay remained committed. By the early 1930s, George began stepping aside. Though he still monitored key operations, he allowed Jay more control. The shift marked the start of a new chapter, one that would redefine not only the company, but American food culture. What came next was one of the most unusual and wildly successful food products ever developed: the invention of Spam. By the mid-1930s, J. Hormel was determined to solve a challenge that had long plagued the meat industry: how to make profitable use of pork shoulder, a fatty, tough, and typically discarded cut. In an era when the Great Depression had made both food prices and efficiency paramount, Jay believed a high-quality, shelf-stable meat product could meet a real market need, if it could be perfected. Development began in earnest at Hormel's in-house lab. The initial formulations were crude, some spoiled too quickly. Others had an off-putting texture or taste. Preservative balance was critical. Too much sodium nitrate would affect flavor. Too little would risk spoilage. It took months of trial and error, blending pork shoulder with ham meat, adding sugar, water, and salt, and processing it in vacuum-sealed cans to find the right consistency. Eventually, the team struck a balance: a pink, compact meat block that held shape, resisted spoilage, and tasted surprisingly good. Marketing it, however, was another matter. Jay wanted a name that was short, easy to say, and memorable. In 1937, he launched a national naming contest, offering a small cash prize for the winning entry. The term Spam was submitted by Kenneth Daigneault, the brother of a Hormel executive, and was quickly approved. Though interpretations vary, most agree it stood for spiced ham or shoulder of pork and ham. Still, grocers were hesitant to stock it. The idea of canned meat made from discarded cuts raised eyebrows. Jay responded with bold outreach. He personally traveled to retail chains, offered cooking demonstrations, and sponsored radio programs. Hormel also deployed teams of housewives to hold recipe tastings in stores, one of the earliest forms of live food sampling. Early ads positioned Spam as economical, quick, and versatile. It could be sliced, fried, served cold, or added to casseroles. Slowly, sales climbed, not because consumers immediately trusted it, but because Hormel and Jay never let up. They understood that Spam was more than a product. It was a new category that needed public education. Then came war, and Spam's fate changed forever. Spam goes to war. When World War II erupted, the U.S. military faced a logistical nightmare: how to supply millions of troops overseas with enough protein that wouldn't spoil, rot, or demand refrigeration. Hormel and his son's new invention, Spam, arrived just in time to meet that challenge. Compact, durable, and high in calories, Spam quickly became a staple of military rations. Its long shelf life and ease of transport made it a logistical dream for quartermasters. The demand exploded. Between 1941 and 1945, the company supplied over 100 million cans of Spam to the U.S. military, but the massive scale-up came with its own share of problems. Factories ran 24 hours a day to meet military orders, putting intense pressure on machinery and workers alike. Tin for cans was in short supply due to wartime rationing. Jay and Hormel had to negotiate priority access through government contracts, balancing civilian sales with military needs. To keep operations moving, Jay took several unorthodox steps. He hired thousands of new workers, including women who had never worked in meatpacking before. Hormel also built in-house cafeterias, introduced round-the-clock shifts, and even offered incentives like housing assistance to retain employees. Injuries were common on the lines, and worker fatigue threatened output. Hormel responded by introducing safety bonuses and rotating schedules. It was an early form of progressive factory management. Despite Spam's utility, its reception among soldiers was mixed. Many troops joked that Spam was served at every meal, fried in the morning, cold at lunch, and boiled at dinner. Still, it was food, and in war, food was survival. Spam became so widespread that it earned nicknames like ham that didn't pass its physical and meatloaf without ambition. Yet for many, it was the one constant across battle zones. Back home, Hormel faced criticism for profiting off government contracts. In response, he voluntarily froze Spam prices for military sales and redirected some profits toward war bonds and community causes. It was a savvy move that silenced most critics and reaffirmed the brand's reputation. Spam had transitioned from an experimental canned meat to a wartime necessity. Its place in American life was no longer just about convenience. It had become woven into the fabric of national service. And when the war ended, Spam didn't disappear. Instead, it went global. A global phenomenon. As World War II came to a close, American troops returned home, but Spam stayed behind. The canned meat had traveled with them to remote bases across the globe, leaving an unexpected cultural imprint. In places like South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, Guam, and Hawaii, Spam became part of daily life. Not because it was exotic, but because it was accessible, filling, and left behind in surplus. In regions still recovering from war, with disrupted food systems and limited refrigeration, Spam offered a ready-to-eat protein that didn't spoil. But global expansion wasn't automatic. In many markets, Spam was initially met with skepticism. In humid climates, the original packaging sometimes failed. Hormel responded by developing moisture-resistant labels and resealing methods to ensure freshness in tropical conditions. In places like the Philippines and South Korea, Hormel adjusted salt levels and taste profiles to match local palates. Jay also recognized early that success abroad meant more than just exporting cans. It required cultural integration. In Hawaii, Spam quickly became an everyday ingredient in dishes like musubi and fried rice, thanks to its versatility and mild flavor. In South Korea, it was added to budae jjigae, or army stew, a dish born from leftover rations. Hormel leaned into these uses, launching bilingual packaging and even adjusting recipes to reflect local traditions. Spam was no longer just an American product. It became a culinary chameleon. The brand sponsored cooking contests, created limited edition flavors, and highlighted Spam's global fan base. What began as a survival food had become a global staple, even celebrated in festivals like Hawaii's Spam Jam. And to think that behind this revolutionary product's fame was the story of a poor man who had risked everything and built an empire from scraps. The legacy of George A. Hormel. George Hormel died on September 5, 1946, of a heart attack at the age of 85. He passed away quietly, just as Spam was reaching an unthinkable global peak. Though he didn't live to witness the full cultural impact of the product his company created, his legacy had already been sealed, not just in cans of meat, but in the very structure of American industry. He had transformed from a 12-year-old dropout hauling meat scraps into a pioneering businessman who laid the foundation for one of the most enduring brands in food history. By the time of his death, the company had become more than a meat packer. It was a symbol of innovation, labor fairness, and resilience. Hormel had insisted on cleanliness before regulations required it. He paid workers fairly when many in the industry didn't. He rebuilt after betrayal and refused to let failure become his narrative. And most importantly, he gave his son room to lead, even when their visions clashed. Under Jay's leadership, the company didn't just survive, it evolved. New lines of shelf-stable meats, frozen products, and convenience foods expanded Hormel's footprint in post-war America. The brand launched international variants, kosher and halal versions, and limited editions that sold out within days. In places like South Korea and Hawaii, Spam became so culturally embedded that it was offered as holiday gifts and wedding favors. The company established the Spam Museum in Austin, Minnesota, a full-circle tribute to where George first opened his butcher shop with a $500 loan. Today, over 8 billion cans of Spam have been sold in more than 40 countries. As of 2025, the company is worth $17 billion. But behind those numbers is the quiet, determined legacy of George Hormel, a man who saw value in discarded cuts, who chose grit over glamour, and who proved that greatness could grow from the scraps no one else wanted. What do you think about Spam? Tell us in the comments below. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.